All right, we have people joining us this morning. We'll give you about 45 seconds, 1 minute to get everyone in. All the attendees are popping in. It does take a little bit of time. And then we're going to turn it over to Trey here in about 10 seconds.
Good afternoon. Boma Austin welcomes you today. I want to thank you again for taking the time to join us for a Project Connect system overview and a presentation from the Transit Now group, which is the group that has been formed to support Prop A. And we've got two panelists today that just happen to be two good friends of mine of many years now. And so we're really pleased that they were able to join us. First, I want to introduce you to Patrick Rose. Patrick is a former member of the Texas House of Representatives from House District 45, which compromises Blanco, Caldwell, and Hays counties in Central Texas. He was in the House from 2002 to 2010, and if I may say, was an excellent member, was a go-to guy for all of us in the business community. There are times where I wish Patrick were still in the legislature. We could use his.
That makes one of us, Trey. That makes one of us.
Patrick is now president of Corridor Title and is a past president of the Real Estate Council of Austin, along with a whole lot of other organizations. His community service is extensive and is very well respected in our business community. Our other panelist is Wade Cooper, another fantastic guy that has done a lot for this community himself. Wade is the managing partner at Jackson Walker, which happens to be one of my favorite law firms. Do a lot of work with Tim Taylor and Pam Adair over there. He began his practice with Jackson Walker in the Dallas office in 1981 when he was only 12 years old. And then in 1997, he moved to Austin to establish the new office for Jackson Walker. Wade currently chairs the CapMetro Board of Directors, which is why he's here today, and is also, just so you know, a past chair of the Downtown Austin Alliance. And his community service, like I said, just like Patrick's, is extensive. Both very well respected, and we're very lucky to have your time today. Both are here to tell us again about why we should support Prop A, or why they're supporting Prop A. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you just to let everybody know, a reminder, as we said yesterday, please feel free to use the chat room so that you can answer questions. If you want feedback, we're going to save questions till the end of their presentation. But like yesterday, if you want to text me questions, that's fine too. I had a lot of that yesterday. So, but feel free to use the chat room so that we can have a good dialogue back and forth at the end. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
All right. Thanks, Trey. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Talia. We're really pleased to be here. As Trey said, I'm a former chair of the Downtown Austin Alliance and currently chair CapMetro, so we're very familiar with BOMA. I probably have partners who are members of BOMA scattered around the state. As Trey said, my day job, when not trying to persuade people to come to our side of the fence on Prop A, is managing Jackson Walker Law Firm firm-wide. And we've got offices around the state in Dallas and Houston, San Antonio, Fort Worth, and a few other smaller cities. About 160 employees here. And in a normal year, I'd be traveling around the state and traveling around the country. And so I've become pretty familiar with the competition for Austin around the state of Texas and how we fare, not only in our competition in Texas, but travel to cities like Phoenix and Denver and Seattle. And I'm here today and I'm chair of CapMetro because I believe we in Austin are way behind. We haven't done a good job of taking care of our transit needs. And so I'm really pleased today, along with Patrick, to be here to talk to you about it. As Trey mentioned, I was chair of DAA, and that's really where I stuck my toe into the transit waters back in the early 2000s. We were working with TxDOT then to try to reimagine I-35 and how it would work with downtown. But that project got canceled. And then one of my predecessors, a guy by the name of Lee Walker, came up with the idea of doing a red line. And so that was my introduction to transit. And I have been sort of involved either at the DAA or a number of working groups, and now with CapMetro, thinking about transit for the last 20 years. And I've come to become a huge proponent both of Project Connect and Prop A, but the broader role of transit in our community. So really delighted to have the chance to visit with you about it today. And before I get into the PowerPoint, let me just say that as we have thought about putting this plan together, and we've been working on it really since the 2014 ballot initiative failed, thinking about what we did wrong and what this community really wants and needs. And I'll just start at a very high level spot and say our conclusion was that we need a really robust regional plan, not a one-off project here or there, but we need to think about something that is a building block for generations to come. And so I'm really proud that our staff working with the city has come up with what I think is a foundational multi-generation plan that will serve our city as we move into the future, doubling, tripling in population. And it's not just a rail plan. Others may describe it that way, but there's lots of technologies, lots of tools in the toolboxes I think you'll see. So with that, let's go over to the PowerPoint and let me show you what I'm proud about. Let's see if I can manage the technology. There we go. So this is an outline of the broad Project Connect plan. We're talking about 2 new light rail lines, an orange line, and these are rail lines running down the middle of streets, and I'll show you the maps here in just a second. A blue line. The orange line really would be the backbone of our city. It runs right down the middle, really right between Mopac and I-35. The blue line would be coming from the airport into downtown and would connect with the orange line. The gold line in the future would be light rail, but initially would be bus rapid transit, and that would be from Highland Mall into downtown at the convention center and then over to Republic Park. And then you see below that Metro Rapid lines. The original full robust plan was 7 new routes, and we've pared this plan back. I'll describe that in a little bit. And then improvements to the red line. When the red line got built, it was in many respects a demonstration project. It wasn't built to optimize moving people around. And we have been working on that. We'll next week do a ribbon cutting on a brand new station downtown. There's lots of work to continue to do. And so this plan envisions, for example, building bypass tracks so trains can cross each other and run with passengers in each direction. And then into the future, a green line, which is like the red line, a commuter rail line, initially going out toward Colony Park, and then sometime in our kids' life, maybe out to Manor and Elgin. And then new Metro Express bus lines. These are like the lines we're running down Mopac. When we opened up that managed lane of Mopac, we saw tremendous growth, people waiting in line to get on the buses, and we think that's another very important tool. And then park and rides. The original plan had 24 new park and rides scattered around the outlying areas. And then improvements to our Metro bus system, including expanded bus service, better technology, moving towards an all-electric, environmentally friendly fleet, and then new circulator zones. And this is where we've replaced a bus running down the same street with Uber-like technology in a small van. It's a much more efficient way to gather up people and collect them and connect them to either the rest of our transit system or other essential locations in their neighborhood. So that's very quickly the plan. Let me talk about the individual components. The orange line, as I said, would be the backbone of our community and the backbone of our system. It would run initially from, in the initial plan from Tech Ridge down Lamar, crossing over to Guadalupe, coming through downtown, entering a tunnel, coming out of the tunnel, probably on the south side of downtown, crossing the First Street Bridge, headed over to Congress, and then going all the way down to Slaughter. So destinations would be the new North Lamar Transit Center, Crestview, UT, Republic Square, and there it would be underground, Auditorium Shores, and the South Congress District. Now, this is the original system plan. The initial investment would go as far north as the North Lamar Transit Center, which would be here. If you can, I don't know if you can see my arrow. And then as far south as Stastny. So that would really run right up the gut of our community and would be the workhorse of this system. Here's some additional interesting information about it. 21 miles, if we built the whole thing out, 22 stations. Just quickly to give you a sense of what we're talking about here, look at, for example, Tech Ridge all the way up north to Republic Square. Again, this is beyond the initial investment, but you're talking about a 33-minute ride, whereas in a car it would take you almost twice that. Ridership 54,000 to 74,000 a day. Here's a couple interesting demographics. More than 250,000 jobs within a half mile of that route. And the people along that route, you have almost 8% of them, almost 9% of them with 0 cars. 23% of the folks within a half mile below the poverty line. So there are a number of folks who could really benefit from this. And then you see the environmental benefits, over 100 million miles annually reduced. So that's both traffic and air pollution. The blue line running from the airport, essentially down Riverside, across the lake with a new dedicated bridge, a bridge dedicated for pedestrians and transit, coming into the convention center, and then entering the tunnel, going left, meeting up with the orange line at Republic Park in the tunnel, and then going north. So we're going to have basically the the orange line and the blue line headed north and south on Guadalupe and Lamar. So it would be super service in that part of our city. Again, some interesting statistics about the blue line. Imagine stepping off your airplane, headed to the front end of a new terminal building and being able to get on the blue line and being downtown in 20 minutes, as opposed to having to get your car out of parking and working your way through rush hour. Again, the demographics here, ridership estimated to be 16 to 19,000 a day. 10% of the households within a half mile of this line don't have a single car, 26% in poverty today. Again, almost 250,000 jobs within a half a mile. And you can see, again, a pretty significant reduction in vehicle miles traveled. So those are the two new proposed light rail lines. The green line would be very similar to the red line that we currently have, only it would go on an existing line, which just needs to be improved a bit for passenger travel and then stations built, out through East Austin, through Springdale, to a park and ride at US 183, and then to Colony Park. And then ultimately out to Manor and Elgin. We own that line, and so it's just a question of improving our ability to operate out that far. So that's the green line, commuter rail, as opposed to light rail. Next, Metro Rapid. This is our version of Bus Rapid Transit. True Bus Rapid Transit has totally dedicated lanes. This would be similar to what we see today with the 801 and the 803 with some improvements. As I said initially, the Gold Line would not be light rail. It would be BRT running from ACC Highlands to South Congress. I'm sorry, from ACC Highland actually into Republic Park. And then we would have a very good line going east to the Expo Center, another one going south and east down Pleasant Valley, which you can see. Here's the Expo. This would be the Gold Line here, and then over to Republic Square. And then the Expo Center line, which would be a huge benefit and great service to the members of our Eastern community. And then the Pleasant Valley line, again, providing great service into the southeast quadrant of our city. And then the western side of town would receive improved service all the way up from here into downtown, and then south to Oak Hill and splitting and going down Manchaca. So 4 new BRT lines, similar, as I said, to what we have today, the big bendy buses, but with some improvements so that they can operate more quickly. And then in addition to that, we would have 9 new parking rides, 4 new express buses, similar to what we're running down the middle of Mopac, and then more than a dozen neighborhood circulators. And this is really one of the things I'm proud about in terms of my tenure on the board at CapMetro. We've become pretty excited about the opportunity to replace a traditional 40-foot bus running down the same route every day, as I said, with these small circulator vans using Uber-like technology to find riders and figure out the most efficient way to gather them up, and then either bring them to a transit stop within their neighborhood so they can connect to the rest of the system, or to bring them to an essential location within that immediate circulator area. It's much more efficient. There's a cost savings to us. We don't have to buy 40-foot buses, and we can move people around more expeditiously, better service for them as well. So let me talk about the initial investment sequence. Because of COVID, both the City Council and CapMetro Board recognize that we need to scale back our ambition. And so we're going with a slightly reduced orange line. We would begin that right away, and it would take us 8 or 9 years to get that done. And you can see sort of the sequencing here. Likewise with the blue line, the Metro Rail, the improvements to the red line, we can begin right away. And as I said, this next week, we'll do the ribbon cutting for a new station, which will let us bring in 3 trains at a time. So we're improving the capabilities of our red line dramatically. And we earlier this year agreed to build a station with Brandywine out at the Domain. And likewise, this program would let us work with the guys who brought us the soccer team to build a station out at McCalla. So some exciting improvements on the red line if we can get this referendum passed. You'll see here the green line wouldn't begin for about 8 years. So it's down the road a bit, which is appropriate because we need the densities to improve in that area and probably need to find some additional sources of funding. Metro Rapid, phase 1 would begin. In fact, we're underway with 3 of those 4 lines and have made application already with the feds and gotten some of the initial approvals that are necessary. The gold line, as I said, we would start the process ultimately one day to have rail, but in this stage, it would be built as BRT. And then you can see additional timelines for the Metro Express, the park and rides, improvements to our bus system, technology system, and then at the very bottom, $100 million initially available for transit supportive investments related to displacement mitigation. Very important to the community to feel like we're not immediately coming in and causing values to increase such that people can't afford to live in their old neighborhoods. So this is one of the largest packages we're aware of, coupled with a transit referendum to take care of residents in their neighborhoods so that they can remain in their houses. So that is sort of a glimpse of the timeline. Let's talk about financing. Initially, we had a larger package. We've scaled it back to $7.1 billion. We would expect the local contribution to be 55%. That would be comprised of dollars from CapMetro, sales tax dollars from CapMetro, federal grants from the Federal Transit Authority, and then, of course, the city tax rate election that we're talking about today. Tax rate election contemplates an 8 3/4 cent addition to the city's tax rate. You may have heard and seen signs indicating that there's a 25% increase in, this will call for a 25% increase in taxes. It's not really honest. The increase to the total ad valorem tax burden would be about 4%. This chart gives you some numbers on how that would actually play out for individuals. The median home value in Austin, not the average, the median is about $325,000, maybe a hair more. So the impact for the median homeowner in Austin would be $284 a year, $23.70 a month, and about 78 cents a day. And I can tell you, and you all know this, that that's about a month and a half of parking in our building downtown. So it's not, this is not cheap, but compared with some of the other statistics I have for you later, I think you'll see the value. Both the city council and the CapMetro board were very cognizant that the community is going to want transparency. They're going to want very good oversight. And so we created the concept of the Austin Transit Partnership so that there would be governance independent from both city council and CapMetro. So there will be an independent board with independent auditors. City council gets to appoint one member, CapMetro appoints one, and then there will be 3 independent directors, one of whom has to have substantial finance experience, another one with construction experience, and then another with planning experience. And then at the end of the day, CapMetro is actually doing the operations, but the construction of this and the oversight would belong to this independent board. There have been some questions about whether we could get funding. This is just a quick look at some of the recent full funding grant agreements that the federal government has funded and authorized and funded. During the Trump administration, there have been at least 35 of these agreements and payments of over $8 billion to cities and authorities to build transit lines, including, for example, Fort Worth and Dallas. And you can see several in Arizona and California. So we're confident that the dollars are there. Just this week, Congress passed and the president signed an extension of this program. So the funding continues into the next year. John Hawkins did an economic analysis. Many of you are familiar with his work around this community. Kind of quickly, for every $1 billion invested, almost $1.4 billion in economic activity. And for every $1 billion invested, almost 10,000 new jobs. So this would be a significant contribution to our local economy at a time when we could really use it. He discussed all kinds of benefits, of course, cost savings for those who can use it, and cost savings for those who are watching other people use it. So that report is available if you want to see it, but among the conclusions is that it benefits everybody, not just those who are riders. And then other community benefits, access to employment, we're dramatically improving that, not only employment, but housing and medical, environmental quality, public safety, and a variety of other things he mentions in this report. And now sort of to the eye candy, this is a picture of what the light rail would look like running down the center of one of our boulevards. For the most part, it would be on Riverside on the south end coming in from the airport, and then Lamar moving to Guadalupe, and then South Congress on the orange line. So you see here the train in the center, trying to avoid conflicts with curbs and curbside activities. And then we've talked about a tunnel. We spent a lot of time trying to decide what we thought about a tunnel. And the ultimate conclusion, I think, both on the city council and the CapMetro board is we're looking at a project that should have a useful life of 100 years. And we ought to plan for that. I was in Brooklyn earlier this year to see my 4th granddaughter come into this world, and rode a line that ran right down the middle of Brooklyn that had been there about 100 years. And you think about the benefit that that has brought to that community and the manner in which it has sort of driven development around that community. drove home the point that we ought to do this right. And so this is a concept of what an underground station would look like. This would be the bottom floor where you actually get on the trains, and you can see here it's got many of the features that you see at good airports, with the doors closing, opening and closing outside the train to keep air conditioning in. And our team has really sort of designed this with a view that we want this to be an amenity that people are proud of, not something that you might think of as being an old station in New York or Boston. So that's the ground level concept. I'm sorry, the bottom level concept. And then this would be sort of a mezzanine level. And if we build this station in the street near Republic Park, one of the great things is we have the opportunity, as that area is being redeveloped, to connect several large real estate developments to this station through underground tunnels, and provide retail amenities and other commuter amenities in a fashion like you see in some of the other large cities in our country. This, in essence, would become sort of the Grand Central Station of Austin, and then the station at the convention center would likewise be underground, and then you would have the red line coming in at surface grade. So you'd have the red line down the road, the green line intersecting with this blue line at the convention center. So be pretty cool for our convention customers to be able to get on a train at the airport terminal and then end up at something like this right below our convention center or convention hotels. This is just quickly an example of a parking ride, that a conceptual vision of one of those where you have car charging stations, you have bicycles for last mile, you have a bunch of amenities to drive last mile solutions. And then I think this is the last slide, sort of a regional transit center where you see this may be something that like what we would envision in the suburbs, where you have a parking ride at the top with our express buses, our local buses, light rail, and then maybe regional buses, and then hopefully doing some value capture with retail and office, or retail and residential built alongside of it. Seen some cool examples of this when we went out in Seattle and Denver, for example. That, I think, is the end of my slideshow. Let me just make a couple other points, and then we'll stand for cross-examination. First, I want to say we're really happy today to get the endorsement of the Austin American Statesman. I think they did a great job of making the case and going through the analysis. As I said, it's not cheap, it's not inexpensive, but it's long overdue. And I think they said it really elegantly and really well. We're also pleased to say we have the endorsement of the Chamber and RECA and Aero and the Downtown Austin Alliance, which I know this group has partnered with a number of times in other projects. And so we're really proud of those endorsements. And I want to make the case to you that as a business person, and as in my case, somebody who has employees who are commuting in, this is something we really need to do. I'm a little bit of a data nerd, and so let me share a little bit of data with you that I think is compelling. The Statesman today, if you haven't seen their endorsement, their editorial, reference the Texas Transportation Institute study of traffic in Austin. Their most recent study was 2017, and what they said is the average driver in Austin is spending 66 hours stuck in traffic. That was as of 2017. In the aggregate, they said we spend 68 million hours in our city stuck in traffic. The cost of that, they said, was $1.37 billion to our region, or more specifically, $1,400 per commuter, and much more for commercial trucks. That's a significant burden that our opposition is not talking about, the cost of being stuck in traffic and the cost of traffic to our community. Well, as I said, that was the Texas Transportation Institute, and that was as of 2017. I stumbled across a really interesting website. There's a company called TomTom that some of you may know. TomTom makes car navigational devices and maps. They supply navigational devices to many auto manufacturers. They have over 600 million of their devices in operation around the world, and they're getting data from those devices every 30 seconds. So they, every year for the last couple of years, have analyzed traffic in 400 cities, 400 plus cities around the world. And their data is really compelling. They said in 2019 that Austinites are spending 14 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the evening rush hour stuck in traffic. They added that up and said that the average driver in Austin is spending 133 hours stuck in traffic, 5.5 days. And this is based on them comparing what it takes to drive from point A to point B when there's no traffic, and then looking at what in fact our experience has been. So 5.5 days stuck in traffic. What makes that really scary is, you all know this, we're the fastest growing big city in America and expected to double in size in the next 20 years. And I can tell you with some assurance, having been around transit for the last 20-something years, we're not doubling our road capacity in this community. And specifically, we're not doubling it around downtown or the Domain, where our largest employment centers are. So we can look forward to 5.5 weeks or 133 hours growing pretty dramatically as our community continues to grow. The second thing I would say is we have an affordability issue for our citizens in this community. And that's of importance to me because while we pay our first-year lawyers an awful lot of money, our secretaries and other staff members are paid just as your employees are. And they're getting pushed further and further out. And for our lowest paid folks, our colleagues who are running the copying machines and receptionists, it's becoming almost impossible to live in our city. And one of the great things this project and transit in general does is if you can ride our system without having to have a car, you can save $9,000 or $10,000 a year. Transportation is the second largest expense in most households. And so this will have a large impact in terms of making Austin affordable for all of us, and in particular our essential workers, the people running the hotels and cleaning out the hospitals and driving our buses, for example. The third thing I would say is environmental. You've heard me talk about that before, but using the federal modeling procedures and methodologies, our estimation is by 2040, we would remove 138 million vehicle miles, 138 million. Think about that in traffic terms. And in terms of greenhouse gases, that equates to 55,000 tons of greenhouse gases. And then the last point I'll make to you is, or last reason to vote for it, and then I have a couple broader ideas I want to mention to you, is safety. Studies show that in communities where transit is readily available, there are far fewer auto accidents and pedestrian deaths. Last year, we had 88 people killed in traffic accidents and pedestrian fatalities here in Austin. So as we think about trying to reduce the mortality rate of just operating a car and walking in our neighborhoods, transit would be a big help. So those are 4 important ideas, I think, for you to put in your calculus. Let me mention a few other things, then we'll stand for cross-examination. Cost we've talked about. Admittedly, this is not a cheap project, but it's about 4% increase in ad valorem taxes. That's meaningful to me. I rent 4 floors in 100 Congress, and so I know it's not cheap, but it will cost us a lot more if we wait. And let me give you an example of that. The airport that we have now in the late 90s cost us a little less than $600 million to build. The project that recently was surfaced to add on to our airport, not to redo it totally, but to add on to it, was $4.5 billion, 8 times the original cost of building the whole airport. So if we kick this can down the road, somebody's going to be paying more for that. And that's an important point for all of us to consider. And then I know some are raising questions about federal funding. I showed you the chart. Over 35 projects, $8 billion, and these large transit projects have been funded during the Trump administration. And as I said, they just reauthorized that program. So finally, I would say this, we're not your father's transit agency anymore. We have taken a beating, and deservedly so, over the years for the way we have run our organization. But I think you would be very proud, and I'm very proud of the organization that we have today. We're very data driven. We're very efficiency driven. We believe in technology. We've totally reorganized our bus system a couple of years ago, Cap Remap. As a result of that, we saw substantial increases in ridership. I think we had 16 straight months of ridership gains before COVID hit. We don't believe a 40-foot bus is the answer to every solution. We're trying all kinds of technology to be efficient. As I said, using these pickup zones with small buses and Uber-like technology. We've just done a deal with B-Cycle to be an innovative last mile provider. We're good stewards of your money. We've won countless awards for financial transparency. We came into this pandemic with our reserves fully funded, and among transit agencies in the country, we have one of the very best balance sheets in terms of the concept called state of good repair. A lot of transit companies fund operations by deferring maintenance. We don't do that. We have a new fleet, and we have really a very good record on that. And so we came into this pandemic, and we'll come out of this pandemic in good shape financially. So I think if you pulled back the covers on CapMetro, and you can do that very easily by going to our website, we have data on every one of our routes and our finances. I think you'd be very proud of us, and I think you would agree that we'll be good stewards of your money. And then finally, I will say, this is not just about ridership and dollars. This is about who we are as a community. Are we going to take care of all of our colleagues in this community, or just folks that live on the west side? Are we going to be good stewards of our environment? Are we going to be planners? Are we going to kick this can down the road for our kids to fix? I wasn't much of a Boy Scout, but I raised 2 Eagle Scouts. And one of the things that I was proud about the scouting program is just their little concept of leave the campground better than you found it. And that's what I think we're endeavoring to do here. So I hope you'll join us. And with that, Patrick will answer all the hard questions. I'll take the softballs, and Trey, I'll hand it back to you.
Right. Wade, thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation, very thorough, and a good reminder of why, a lot of people are starting to say it should be Wade Cooper in 2012 running for mayor of Austin. He's probably not happy I said that, but there are
You heard it here first.
Mrs. Cooper would not be a proponent.
Great job. Yeah, let's get to the questions. So let's first talk about density. And Patrick, maybe you can help us with this one. A lot of Project Connect and the Land Development Code revisions were, semi-tied together. They go hand in hand so that you can try to build the density necessary to get to the ridership numbers that Wade was showing in the presentation. And so how are those projections made? Because they're significantly higher, obviously, than the red line ridership numbers. And how do we get there density-wise with the Land Development Code that's been thrown out of the courts? It's on complete pause. They may have to start all over again. How do you address that? How do you get to these type of ridership numbers with the density we have today?
Trey, thank you. I'll start, and then Wade, you might speak to the modeling piece of it.
Sure.
In summary, the modeling was done with very conservative assumptions as it relates to density. Far less density, Trey, than you and I and the members of BOMA would want. But great question. I'll tackle it with a couple answers. But first, context. I have not been somebody who's been a student of transit in my civic or business life. I was brand new to this issue last year as I was chairing the board of the Real Estate Council, and came into this issue absolutely concurrent, Trey, you're right, with the land use and land development code rewrite discussion. Clearly, land use density is inextricably linked to transit. And in a perfect world, we'd be in a place where we had a code that was approved that did exactly what we here want it to do, which is create density where we want it, avoid it where we don't, create a compact, connected, densified, place-made, world-class city, right? As you know, the courts are right now hearing on appeal what Jan Seufer's decision at district court, which I think was a political and bad decision. The truth is this current council had 7 votes for a good, not perfect rewrite. You make that a 9-vote situation, we're going backwards, not forwards, frankly, as you know, Trey. So we are in a holding pattern on the land development code. That's just the only way to describe it. It's frustrating. I had an old mentor and friend say to me, well, why don't we just wait to pass transit till we have a perfect city council? And I would let that sink in for a second. And while the council did a great job, I think, on unanimously approving the system plan alongside CapMetro unanimously in June, certainly many of us, including me, have concerns about some recent decisions, right? So in summary, I am as aggressively supportive of a rewrite of our land development code that is right and proper and does the things for our city that Imagine Austin called for. I'm as aggressively supportive of that as I am supportive of Proposition A, because they go in tandem. Unfortunately, Prop A is going to go first. If it passes, it will have gone first, and perhaps, and hopefully, it'll be a catalyst for the sort of density along our transit corridors that is precisely what we need and what would be furthered by transit. Wade, you want to maybe speak a little bit on the assumptions on ridership there and the conservative nature of them?
Yeah, let me give you a little history of how we did our work on this. When Randy got to town, his immediate reaction is, let's just do really good bus rapid transit. That'll be cheaper and faster in the community. It'll be less controversial. But the engineering firms kept running the numbers. And then when they put the 2045 Campo stuff, or I guess it was 2025 Campo demographics in, what kept coming up was our BRT lines will be at capacity shortly after we get them built. And that was kind of a splash of cold water in our face. And so we really had to think hard about that, because we knew rail came with some emotional baggage in some parts of our community. And it would be a whole lot easier just to say we're going to run buses. But the truth of the matter is, using the federal modeling that all these projects are tested against each other with and graded against each other with, and using Campo data, not numbers we cooked up, didn't make any sense to run buses. We could build it out, spend a bunch of money, and then we'd be at capacity. We wouldn't have solved the problem. So that's the thought process that we went through. And we're not, we're not just pulling these numbers out our backside. We have 3 of the top 5 engineering firms in the world working on this project, and their reputations are on the line as well. And we have the leading transit financial advisor in the country working on this project. So it's not a bunch of rubes who have never done this before. The second thing I will say is, what happens if we don't do this? We create the largest sprawling city in America. I mean, we're going to be shortly the number 10 largest city in the country, and 9 of them have heavy rail and or light rail. And so if we don't create the tools to densify, we will have a sprawling community, like my old hometown of Dallas, loop upon loop upon loop. And that is very expensive. You have to have more fire stations, more water lines, more sewer lines. When you spread out, you're really creating an unsustainable municipal finance model. It's really hard on the system. And so there's a cost to not trying to densify. And then the last thing I'll say is I've looked at the densities. We're over 3,000 people per square mile. Houston's at 3.6, San Diego 4.3. This system's not going to be built overnight. It's going to take us 8 years to get the light rail. Where will we be in 8 years? That's close to halfway to doubling. So what will our densities be in 2028, 2029? So
Okay.
good question, but
A quick follow-up, and then I want to get to some of the questions in the chat room. But talking about the city council, can you talk a little bit more about this independent board and how it's going to work? Because, in all honesty, we've got a business community and multiple business organizations right now that are very, very upset with the Austin City Council and some of the decisions they've made, from the way they've handled the homeless situation to the potential defunding of the Austin Police Department, things that many in our community just don't feel are what our community values are. How's this independent board work? Because I hear from a lot of people, why in the world would I vote for this and give this kind of money to the Austin City Council?
sure. Well, I think both the council and CapMetro were self-aware enough to understand that the community was going to demand the highest possible level of scrutiny and independence on this. And so the board is 5 board members. This is in the contract with the voters, and we did a similar agreement resolution our board passed. And then we have ILA between our 2 entities that we both enacted. So this is pretty much set in concrete. Be 5 board members, as I said, 1 from the city council, 1 from CapMetro, and then 3 independently appointed. There are specific qualifications. One's got to have a substantial experience in construction. One has to have substantial experience in finance. One has to have substantial experience in urban planning. And so what we contemplate is a group of experts, or at least dominated by a group of experts. And what their job is really to issue these large contracts and keep an eye on the numbers. The agreements that we've entered into independently with the community and with each other requires to have independent auditors and to have that board meet jointly with each of us once a year. So I understand those concerns. We understood those going into this, and that's why we have an independent board.
Okay. Great, thanks. I hope everyone knows.
Trey,
that.
I would just quickly add, CapMetro board chairs come and go, mayors come and go, even business community leaders come and go, right? We're all here for a time. I think one of the great merits of this proposal is that it is truly setting up a generationally sophisticated and significant program. These funds, much like our healthcare district, do not go to the city council as fiduciary for those funds. These funds, while assessed on City of Austin voters, are sequestered from the city and will be governed as fiduciary by the ATP, Austin Transit Partnership Board of Directors. We don't know who those board directors are yet, because it would have been presumptuous to appoint them before the voters say yes. But at the request of the business community, the mayor and the council, Chairman Cooper and the CapMetro board worked hard to fully bake the interlocal agreement, the bylaws, the articles of incorporation, and the respective contracts with voters, so that we as voters had as clear-eyed a view of independence as possible. And I think those measures were very, very smart to do for precisely the reasons and concerns that you raised.
Okay, great.
I might just add one quick thing. And the agreements dictate what's got to be built. That initial sequence that I showed you, both sides have agreed that's got to be built, and it cannot be changed without agreement from both city council and CapMetro board. So it's pretty baked every way we knew to do it.
Great. Okay, we got about 8 to 10 minutes left, so I want to get through some of these questions real quick if we can get them answered quickly. Where will the equipment be manufactured? Is there a commitment to creating manufacturing jobs locally or in Texas, or will the decision be based on importing less expensive equipment from Europe or Asia?
Yeah, that's better a Randy question than a Chair Cooper question. I don't envision that the rail lines, I don't think we're going to be ordering enough cars to have somebody build a plant here. But if there's a way for us to do that, certainly we'd love to do it. Now, I will say, as we embrace this electric technology, I think there's great opportunities on the educational front to partner with ACC, for example, creating jobs for the maintenance and care of our fleets, both electric buses and electric rail. And we're talking about electric rail, not diesel rail.
Okay. And a similar question, but I think it's going to be more of a Randy question also that we'll ship over is, what kind of transparency will there be with regarding to companies the contracts will be awarded to? That's pretty deep in the procurement world. And so what I think we'll do on those is send those over to Randy so that we can get some answers for the members.
Glad to do that. Let me just say quickly that there is a whole federal procurement process. There's a state one, but when you're taking federal dollars, you're in the federal procurement game. It's very specific and we'll have to comply.
Okay, good.
Ray, let me follow on just a brief comment on that. You know, I mentioned that, you know, like each of the volunteer BOMA representatives here, I have a day job like they, right? All of us are tuning in as we can on issues like this through our volunteerism. What I learned as I began to know Wade and Randy June of last year is just how well run our transit authority is. You know, many of the arguments against this proposal have to do with things that happened 5 and 15 and 25 years ago. And I'm not presumptuous enough to think that those things aren't relevant in the eyes and the minds of the voter, right? Of course they are. They're going to be. However, if anyone takes a hard look at the current management of CapMetro, the board leadership, chairs with us, the CEO and his caliber and experience, we have a world-class run transit authority right now. And I know that wasn't always the case, but it is something worth noting. So as it relates to how we go forward and how we execute on what has been an adopted system plan, adopted unanimously by the city and by CapMetro this June, I have great confidence in CapMetro's ability to execute from an operational standpoint. And it will be incumbent upon all of us, those who are against Prop A and those who were for it, if Prop A passes, to make sure that there's genuine accountability at the ATP. We all need to demand that. And, you know, those of us who have been supportive of Prop A ought to be the loudest in demanding accountability from ATP, spending a lot of money on a very important, time-consuming, long-term project. Just a couple additional words there.
Right. Good follow-up. Thanks. Can you guys speak a little more to the projected timeline of the project from start to finish? Well, traffic is a nuisance. This project, while under construction, will undoubtedly increase traffic wait times, not to mention the inevitable construction delays within a project of this magnitude.
Yeah, well, let me say one thing that I did not mention that I think is very important to point out. When we came up with this, we went to the American Public Transportation Association to get a peer review. So construction gurus from Houston, Dallas, and Seattle came down to look at our plans and cost projections and gave us a few pointers here and there, but overall validated our cost estimates and our timelines and our contingencies. So, and Seattle already has a tunnel. Dallas made the mistake of not building a tunnel initially and is building one now. Houston, of course, doesn't have a tunnel. So we feel like our numbers are as good as they can be. And again, these are international engineering firms. So go ahead.
Wade, follow up on that. Do we know what are the projected tunnel costs? Because we do have a question in there about that.
I'm not used to saying this word, but it's roughly $2 billion.
2 billion of the 7 billion initial investment.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, let me talk about that for just 1 second. That would go from the very north end of downtown, somewhere 14th, 15th Street, probably all the way down to just north of First Street on the orange line, and then would go over under 4th Street, probably to the convention center. So it's a pretty healthy chunk of tunnel. We eliminated a piece which you could add later going north from the convention center. But the importance of this tunnel is, first of all, it eliminates conflicts downtown. One of the big challenges here is there's only a handful of ways you can get in and out of downtown. You run a train through that intersection, you're blocking everybody up. But in eliminating those conflicts downtown, we make the whole system work better, because the delays, a lot of the delays and congestion you're going to have are in the downtown area. So I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Trey, do you mind if I add one
Yeah, go
comment
ahead.
there? As this plan was being vetted last year and into this year, one of the things that I heard often from past opponents of the projects, 2014 and others, is if we don't go big enough, if we don't to scale do something that is really transformational, I'm not for it. Don't nibble around the edges. I would say, Austin, we are innovative, we are creative, we are maybe the best city in the country to live in, this century, and increasingly so. That's why workforce is flocking here. I think the downtown tunnel component of this project not only makes this a far more transformational project, it also takes the conflict of car and pedestrian and train out of the equation downtown, which is important. And it also creates the opportunity to place make. I mean, imagine what downtown would be if you pop out in a buried station, significant, one of the best in the world, after a short 15 to 20 minute train ride from the airport. We take all the cars, the Ubers, the taxis, etc., those people who are coming here for the day trip, off the road. Imagine how catalytic that could be for the city from a job creation standpoint, from a placemaking standpoint. I am so glad that Chair Cooper and the city didn't adopt a plan that fell short of being truly transformational in that way. I think it makes it a far better plan. And for the BOMA members who manage downtown properties, it will be accretive significantly to the momentum of downtown Austin.
Great. A couple more quick ones. So we got one on ridership. Gerald shared with us yesterday that ridership's essentially been flat for the last 30 years. They said 31 million boardings in 1990 and 31 million boardings in 2019. While population has skyrocketed, it doubled essentially. Tell us why you think ridership will be on a level that commiserates with the cost of this, with what these past ridership numbers have looked like over the last 30 years.
Well, I'll say 2 or 3 things. One, sometimes Gerald plays a little fast and loose with the numbers and the percentages. We had 15 straight months of ridership, driven to a large degree by us providing really good service on MOPAC, for example. If you build good transit, people are going to ride it. I have 3 kids who grew up on the west side of town driving Tahoes and Suburbans, who all use transit on a regular basis. That granddaughter that I just mentioned to you, her mom and dad could live anywhere in the country, literally, and they live in Brooklyn, and he commutes to the west side of Manhattan. She went to see her OB-GYN on the subway system. I have a kid in DC. He rides transit regularly. My youngest kid, who drove a Suburban his whole life, works in Dallas. Somebody stole his Tahoe. He found out he lived on top of a rail station. He didn't buy a car for 3 months. If these kids are much more interested in getting from point A to point B and much less interested in what they're driving. So that's point number one. Number two is if you build good transit, people are going to ride it. If you look at, for example, Dallas, 28 million people ride their light rail system. If you look at Houston, 18 million, and theirs is a pretty new one, 18 million people ride it. Phoenix has 15 million people ride it. So if you build good transit and you have the placemaking that Patrick was talking about, you're going to drive ridership. I don't think there's any question about that.
Right.
Let me add this. Wade has made a lot of good arguments for this, and there are equity arguments and placemaking arguments. Let me just make I would argue, very important business case for this. The jobs of this century follow workforce. Workforce doesn't follow jobs. Austin has done with leadership, Trey, that you and Wade have been very involved in, and I've had nothing to do with. I've watched as your generation has done a remarkable job of creating a magnet for workforce. And the jobs of these last 10 to 15 years have followed that workforce to Austin. The workforce of 2025 and 2035 and 2045 is transit interested, and I would argue much of it demands it. And if we're going to continue the job creating success that we've had, which is hard earned and doesn't just happen by accident, in my opinion, if we're going to do that, we've got to create a place where the smartest millennials and Generation Z want to call home.
Good.
And if Austin has a world-class transit system, I think it's accretive, not only to attract that workforce, but most importantly, the jobs that follow that workforce.
Yeah, let me add to that, because I have offices in Dallas and Houston, neither of which is more than 2 blocks from a transit station. We are really behind here in Austin.
2 more quick questions, guys, and then I want to let Patrick be able to close. Are there any other city rail systems that you can point to as a model that do not operate at a huge annual deficit? And then we already talked about who appoints the independent board. And then the last question is, so that's the first one, other models. The other comparable projects that received federal funding were substantially lower in overall costs. Were those projects similar in scope? Will the federal government fund the same percentage on a project of this size?
Yeah, let me take them in reverse order. The premise is wrong on the second one. There are a number of very large projects out there. And as a reminder, Project Connect is really a program of separate projects. So the orange line is not the same project as the blue line. And these bus rapid transit lines are different projects. But let me just list, I happen to have pulled up some projects that were approved or approved for funding this year. Los Angeles West Side Subway Section Number 1, $2.8 billion. They're getting $1.25 billion, 44.3%. They have a related Section 2 project, $2.5 billion. They're getting $1.2 billion, 47%. San Diego has a $2 billion project. They're getting 48%. So there are some huge projects out there that are getting well above 45%. Not all of them, and they're graded. We're graded competitively. And one of the advantages of Gerald having beat us for the last 20 years is we're going to score really well because we don't have any other projects. And so we're running right up the gut. We're going to measure very well on the kinds of things that FTA is interested in. So that your first question was, does anybody run at
Large deficits.
Everybody who runs transit runs a deficit. Like the fire department. That's like asking, does the fire department, anybody run a fire department at a profit? Not everybody needs a fire department, but we all pay for it and we all benefit from its presence. Truth be told, we could raise our fare recovery. We're cheap right now. We're one of the cheapest in the area. And we get about 10% of our operating costs covered by revenue. But for example, one of the things we do is we carry the handicapped members, disabled members of our community. That is very expensive. And so we could abandon that position as some of our opponents. I mean, we could give up transit, but one of the cool things that I've learned is that we're empowering people in wheelchairs to get from their home to get to a job who could not otherwise do that. So the short answer is no, transit does not ever operate for a profit. It's hard for me to, as a business person, to get used to that fact. And I remind Randy that we still can apply business principles. But I will say we do have the obligation to be good stewards of the money. And you can go to our website. You can look at every one of our lines, see our ridership. You can see how we're doing on budget. And I invite you to do that because I think you'll be pretty impressed.
Great. Thanks. Thank you, Wade. Patrick, I want to give you the opportunity to close because I think we've hit all the questions. I want to thank both of you for the presentations today.
Well, Trey, Amy, the entire Bowman membership, we really appreciate you allowing us to make our case for your questions. Lisa Hensley, this is not a solicitation of funds from you, judging on your questions, but I will say to those BOMA participants who are interested in learning more and hopefully supporting, whether that's with your vote, your dollar, your time, your effort. These campaigns, as I think Gerald Doherty might have said yesterday, don't run themselves. They require funds. We have had a very successful effort to raise dollars, large and small, for this campaign. If you have interest in learning more, potentially donating to it, Amy has access to my email address, and I think maybe the most seamless way would be to just ask Amy to connect us. That's a light touch, light sale. What we really wanted to do today is just inform you about the great work of Chairman Cooper, the CapMetro board, this effort. If you have a long-term view for Austin, if you want to create the kind of place that isn't worst in traffic, but best in innovation, I would encourage you to consider Prop A. And Wade, you want to take us home?
Well, I'll just say you can go to Transit Now ATX for more info. There's a really good website there. And if you want to test any of the assertions I made today, you can also go to our website. There is a really good Project Connect set of pages on the CapMetro website that is very good. And if you still don't believe me on how much it's going to cost, the city has a tax calculator, so you can go test our math on those as well. And I just want to say thank you to Patrick. It's sort of humbling to be with a guy who can refer to my generation as your generation, who is such a good-looking and impressive guy. It's a little intimidating, but he's done yeoman's work beating the bushes, doing the hard job of raising money to fund this campaign. So thank you, Patrick. And finally, I'll just say this is a great opportunity for you to leave your campground a little better than you found it. So hope you'll join us in this push.
Gentlemen, both, thank you so very much for your time today. Excellent presentations. Amy, you want to close us out and let them know that we'll be setting up a link and sending our membership.
Yes, we appreciate your time today. Very, very compelling presentation. And we did record it so that we have, like I said, more people watch it afterwards than they do live. Videos is the way of our world right now. So we will be sharing this message with all 300 plus of our members.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, guys.
Good luck.
Good luck. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.